Hey everyone, so just a quick video today to talk through some of the key local features that we consider when we're working with clients that have a pain experience around the elbow or a movement related issue around the elbow, with obviously the most common being that lateral elbow pain. Now ideally when we are considering the features around a local joint complex, we want to consider them within the context of the more global body region. So obviously we're looking at things locally here around the elbow complex, but we do need to consider the elbow within the context of the wrist and the hands and the rest of the coordinating structure. So yes, we're looking at how the wrist and the hand are handling stress and load, how the forearm and the humerus are cooperating to share load across that broader surface area, and how the proximal humerus, the scapula, the rib cage are all interacting with each other as well. But obviously looking at things locally here as well, the first thing we want to look at, the key feature for us, is the shared attachments of the supinator and the pronator teres with the wrist extensors and wrist flexors. Now the supinator muscle will share a common attachment with the wrist extensors at the lateral epicondyle. So you can say the supinators and the wrist extensors will often work together, while the pronator teres and the wrist flexors will share a common attachment to the medial portion of the elbow. Right, so the supinator muscle will be considered a component of the posterior compartment of the elbow, and the pronator teres will be considered a component of the anterior compartment of the forearm. Now, this is important, especially in the context of lateral elbow pain, especially when we consider the movement that's often difficult for clients when we're assessing them, right? So common movements or tests that would often reproduce their pain or cause some discomfort is the extension of the elbow, flexion of the wrist, and pronation of the forearm, right? So to flex the wrist, right, to pronate the forearm, and to extend the elbow, we want the supinator muscle and the wrist extensors to express the capacity to express more eccentric dynamics, more eccentric behavior. We'll touch upon that a little bit more in the last point when we start talking about force or load sharing capacities as well, because that'll kind of push us to work towards determining the contractile variability of the supinator and the wrist extensors. Do they have the capacity to express that variability in their tissue behavior, right? So that their shared attachments is a feature that will be something that we consider when we're working towards loading the tissues around the elbow. The second thing to consider here as well is the general behavior of the wrist extensors versus the wrist flexors. And what the research shows us is that the wrist flexors are much more task dependent. And so what that means is that they'll typically express increased muscle activity with certain tasks, right? Whereas the wrist extensors are less task dependent, which means that they tend to express increased muscle activity regardless of the task or regardless of the condition, right? So that's going to lead to those tissues potentially expressing a little bit more fatigability, which the research also shows us happens quite a bit throughout the wrist extensors as well. And again, this can be a very important feature to consider within the context of lateral elbow pain. Now that we know this coupling behavior between the supinator and the wrist extensors. So, how does this all fit within the context of treatment and restoring more robust load sharing qualities across the elbow and across the upper limb as a whole, right? So in those clients that have difficulty extending the elbow, flexing the wrist, pronating the forearm, right, it may be potentially secondary to increased muscle guarding and protective tension throughout the lateral elbow, which typically arises in the form of increased concentric dynamics, increased concentric behavior of those tissues, so the wrist extensors and potentially the supinator as well. Right, so remember to extend the elbow, we need to pronate the forearm, flex the wrist, and extend the elbow, right? The supinators, the wrist extensors, need to express the capacity. It's not that they have to do this every single time you extend the elbow, but we want them to have the capacity to express more eccentric dynamics or eccentric behavior to allow for that movement to occur. Right, and that's potentially a big reason as to why eccentric loading of those tissues may help somebody that's experiencing lateral elbow pain. But what we can also consider as well is the load of force sharing capacities around the entire elbow. Right, so what if we need to improve the load capacity, the load sharing capacity of the pronators and the wrist flexors to allow for a sharing of load across the elbow as a whole, to give the lateral elbow tissues the chance to unload or to express more some more variability in their contractile behavior. Because remember, these lateral tissues generally express increased fatigability. So putting more load through them early on can sometimes flare clients up with this kind of pain experience in the lateral elbow. So we can sort of rethink where we might need to deliver load based on those features and work towards restoring some contractile variability to the tissues around the elbow. It's not a case of looking at what's weak and what's strong and what's overactive or underactive. It's about restoring contractile variability. And now, of course, we can appreciate that this is looking at things locally, right? And what we teach in our courses is that very often local restrictions are reflections that the more global body region, the entire coordinated structure might not be sharing load very well. So we always need to consider local features within the context of more global features. But with this video, we're just, hopefully you can appreciate that there are local features that we need to consider, and they can help us generate sort of a clearer framework that we can use to guide our loading strategies as well.